Hello. Yeah.
Hi. So, uh, so this is going to be a little conversation, and yesterday I sat down to actually think of what we're going to talk about. And the theme of the discussion or the conversation being textiles, I was sort of taken aback to my first class in textile, where my teacher, Miss Aditi Ranjan, she started the class saying that the moment you're born, you're wrapped in a piece of cloth. And the moment you die, you're again wrapped in a piece of cloth. And between these two events, you're constantly, interacting with something called fabric. And and it's such an intimate relationship that we share with this thing called fabric. So I thought, let me ask you first, what is your first memory of textile, being somebody who's in a generation that's creating fabric since decades? Yeah.
I think the thing about it is that I have been brought up in a textile family. My family have been, making linen for the last 100 years. So every day of my life, from a baby, I have heard about linen and about fabrics and about textiles. It's just been part of my life. It's part of who I am. And it's given me a very, very interesting life because of it. My memories of it, my memories actually are not of the actual textile linen, but the smell of it. Linen is made from flax. Flax is grown in France and Belgium in Europe, but it has a very, very distinctive smell. And if you ever go into a linen factory, you will smell it. It's just got that slightly pungent smell. So my first memory wasn't of the fabric, it was actually of the smell of the fabric.
When I was studying in Paris, and I wanted to show my portfolio to a teacher there, and she was sort of looking at all the work that I had done, and after some time she said, "I really like all the things that you've done, but if there's one thing that I want to tell you, it is that it says nothing about where you come from." So that was also the moment that I sort of started to question my journey as a textile designer, but also to sort of look at how much identity do we bring into textiles, So, which sort of started to make me really think of, should my work reflect the identity that I am born into, or that that I've generated, So a lot of my work is like that. So have you ever wanted to explore, your personal identity through the work that you have been doing?
All the time. I think when you opened the introduction with your teacher saying, when you're a baby, you're born in clothes, and we all, through our lives, there's one thing that we do every single day: we wear clothes, and we wear clothes that give us identity. And that identity changes. I mean, I thought when I came dressed here today, I come with a pair of denim jeans, denim from France. I've got a linen jacket that is obviously Indian inspired. The identity is changing all the time. And it's one of the fascinating things when you come to India and you look at how people dress, what their identity is told very much by the clothes that they wear. And those have come from all different parts of India. And it's how that comes together as to how you as a nation are. It's a very, very interesting idea.
This first struck me when I was traveling to Kumbakonam once, and there was this beautiful weaving cluster there, and I wanted to try and get them to do some work for me. So I took 4 of my mother's saris because I felt it was going to be difficult for me to explain in Tamil. So I took 4 of my mother's saris just to tell them, what kind of work I was expecting. So I spoke to them and I said, see, these are the 4 saris and I'd like to do this and, explain the whole thing to them. After 5 minutes, this particular viewer I was talking to, he put 4 saris aside and separately. And he said, this one's from this village in Andhra Pradesh. This one must have come from this particular place near Bangalore. This one is from Kerala and this one is from Gujarat, So I was sort of shocked because even for me, as somebody who had learned textiles in India at NID, this sort of very specific cultural identity hadn't struck me until this man said that we will only do what we feel is our identity, which I think even now happens to me because as a designer, there are times when people send me images of a Manish Malhotra lehenga and say, can you make this? And I say, no, this is not my identity. I cannot do this,
I've always found it fascinating here in Kerala, the sari with the gold stripe. It is so beautiful. It is something of absolute taste. And I always look at it and I think, that is just something that is very, very special. And I was asking earlier on, where did the gold stripe come from? Because it is centuries of tradition that are woven into the fabrics of all of our lives. And that gold band is obviously, presumably it's centuries old?
Yeah, so I work a lot with the Kasava sari, which is also something that I sort of stumbled into, and it happened during the floods, because the 2018 floods had happened, and there was so much rehabilitation work happening everywhere, and it was also a time of soul searching for me because people were of course we were buying provisions and clothes and all of that, but doctors were doing their job, the army was doing their job. And for a moment it did make me think, if as fashion designers or as textile designers, is our job really that unimportant, especially in a time like that. But 2 days later is when a friend of mine, she sent me an article that came in the newspaper where there was a weaving cluster which had reached out for help, and that is when we sort of jumped in to do initial rehabilitation, but to also understand that there is a larger contribution that textiles has towards livelihood. And if you take a country like India, textile provides the maximum livelihoods, just second only to agriculture. So that is the power that textiles has.
I couldn't agree more, but I was fascinated the other day. I thought India has a population of 1.4 billion people. Each of us here are wearing between 2 and 4 meters of cloth. If you can imagine what 4 or 5 billion yards of textiles and fabrics look like, it is mind-boggling, the size of it. Absolutely. It absolutely is something that it's nearly beyond comprehension, the amount of textiles that there are in India.
Which is also something that everybody talks about these days, which is in terms of speed versus demand, about how fashion was about speed until a few years ago, but now we talk of fashion having a conscience, fashion having a heart, and there was a time when people thought sustainable fashion meant using organic cotton, or organically grown fibers. Then they said, no, it's about the skill that we use, or it's about handloom. And from there it went into saying, no, it's not just that, but it's also ethical wages, So from there we've realized that every stage is so important. But sometimes what happens is that when you try and correct every stage in the production of fashion, we realize that it ends up being so expensive that it's not sustainable anymore. So now I think sustainability has come to a stage where we're saying it is ultimately the customer who decides if it is sustainable or not.
There has been a trend, especially in Europe and America, of fast fashion. disposable fashion, things that are worn. I don't feel that this is so applicable to India, because I think, you know, you value better maybe, or differently, and that's how I would put it. But fast fashion is something that I've seen peak, but I've also seen it start to come back. I think people are much more concerned about sustainability. Look, I'm an older man now, but if the youngsters, the way they're being brought up in school, the way they're being educated, the stress that they're under, where their money is being spent, is it being spent on a phone or is it being spent on a garment? People are, I think, becoming hopefully more careful with their clothes and with their choices. I think the natural trend for fabrics such as ours, linen, cotton, there is a movement away from oil-based fabrics. Having said that, if you look at the evidence of it, the oil-based fabrics still are very much very, very important in fashion. But it is changing, and I hope for everyone that, you know, quality is important. The people who make these things are important. I think if we come to, you know, where is textiles going to? What is it going to look like in the future? I would be very interested what you think of that.
You know, I think what is also happening in fashion is that it's not just about the product anymore. It has also started to be about culture, you know. Fashion now speaks a lot more in terms of culture than it did, you know, earlier, because when people, you know, earlier when people would ask me like questions for a news article, they would ask me stuff like what kind of sleeves are in trend, or, you know, what are the shapes that people are choosing to wear, what are the new silhouettes. But these days they talk about what kind of cultural narrative are you working with, you know, who are the people you are working with, what is the ground reality of the work that you have done, you know. Like, it also makes me proud to say that, you know, the kind of work that we're doing with Chendamangalam, the cluster is debt free in just a matter of 2 years, you know, and that's something that's been going on for decades. So I feel fashion has also become a lot about culture, the way we respond to clothing, and also the fact that we are a lot more prouder of who we are as people, not just to follow trends, but to also express.
Yes, I think that is very much an Indian feeling. It's a feeling of this country, which, if you take it from me, who's from Europe, don't lose it. It's a wonderful thing to have that identity, absolutely. And your clothing gives you that identity. You don't want to throw any of that away. That I think is so important. I think the future, in many ways, people who still do very specialized work, there is always a future for skill. And in India, in your textile industry, there are many artisans with very good skills. And I think that that will become more and more specialized, and it will become more and more expensive. I think the prices that India sells at are most likely still too low. They need to raise. And then you have the other side of it, which is, dare I say, what we do, which is we supply retailers around the world. And really, it's just one word: competition, competition, competition. But that's what it's always been. So it hasn't really changed. So I see the world going into two parts. The big will become bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the little specialist people will become more innovative, more thoughtful, more beautiful.
You know, it reminds me of what my sister-in-law keeps telling me, because every time she lives in Canada and every time she comes here, she rushes to the shop to pick up a few pieces. Then she says she does that because every time she goes in a metro there, you know, there's at least a few people who says, where did you get it from? Because yes, in a crowd of beiges, you know, she's the only one who's wearing color, or there's something so unique. So, yeah. But how do you define sustainability, like for the future?
Well, I think it's important if you look at this little speck of a planet in the universe, where do things come from? If you're having to bore into the ground and take up oil and that it's not instantly replaceable, I think you've got to question, well, is that the clothing that you want to wear? On the other hand, I think that clothing that is made above on soil, like flax, like cotton, I think has really stood the test of time. I always think things that stand the test of time are interesting. If you take, we as people have been here for about 300 or 350,000 years. Well, it's only in the last 100 years that there's a word like polyester, or a word like nylon, or a word like viscose. These are new words in a history. If you put 100 years into 330,000 years, it's tiny. Whereas if you take a product like I make, linen, well, if you go and look at all the Egyptian pharaohs 5,000 years ago, all buried in linen. Jesus Christ, the Shroud of Turin, linen. It has stood the test of time. I think things that stand the test of time always will last. I think if it's coming out, if sustainability, if you can grow it, then it's sustainable. If you're having to drill for it, I think that causes problems.
It's a lot like, I keep saying that fashion is a lot like food. We all keep going through these food trends. For example,
Yes.
in the
Yes.
80s, or in the 90s, we were told that coconut oil is going to be very harmful. But all the people in Kerala would just say, no, our parents have survived with coconut oil for ages. But now there are people around the world who are drinking coconut oil, every morning because because science has come back and proven
Yes.
it. So whatever stood the test of time will always be worth it.
Yeah.
But to come to something that is absolutely new, which is social media, and how it has sort of democratized the space of fashion. How do you think it's sort of affected, or how do you think it's?
Well, social media is, look, the whole revolution that we're living through today, AI, tech, social media, which is not that new now, it's been around for quite a while, are having a huge effect on what we see and what we think. It sort of reminds me of a story. If you looked at fashion, say, 50 or 60 years ago, it was quite drab and grey. And then came a little invention called colour television. Now, most people here most likely don't know what black and white television looked like. You certainly won't. But I remember black and white television. And suddenly there was colour television. Hold on. Suddenly there was colour in fashion again. It generated a whole, because people could see. And that is what social media has done, especially for the young folk here in India. They can everything's available on their phone. They can see the latest trend. They can see the latest fashion. They don't have to read a newspaper to get it. Sure, the people here have been thinking about that. It's a different way of getting your information. And I think the influencers are hugely influential. If some Hollywood or Bollywood star is wearing something, you can see the immediate effects, of people following it. It is changing the way we behave, not only in fashion, in every walk of our life.
What is interesting for me is that when I launched Rauka in 2013, we were chosen to be part of the Lakme Fashion Week, which is the National Fashion Week in India. And we got into what we then realized was the fashion cycle, that you showcase a collection on the runway and you get to meet editors, you get to do private previews with the retailers, you get into the best stores in the country. And in the last 10 years that social media has sort of taken over, and of course post-COVID, what we've seen is the death of something called the fashion cycle, because there is really no fashion cycle.
There's no fashion cycle.
You know, fashion weeks are dead.
Yes.
The fashion magazines are shutting down by the day. Everything has moved online in a matter of, you know, years. And we realized that what we initially used to try to do, you know, over months is something that I can now do with just a reel. You know, I can reach out to 500, 600K people with just a 30-second video. And that has not only just created, I think, a revolution in fashion, but it's also sort of democratized the space that fashion is.
I think that's an important word. It has democratized fashion. It really has made a difference. You can see it all over the place. I always think that one of the things I'm interested always in fashion is people come to me and say, well, what are the new colors for the season? And I always go, because if you actually, I've been looking at people out here, what are the colors of fashion? Well, I'll give it to you. They're white. Quite a lot of people here are wearing white. They're black, they're navy, they're blue, they're cream. There's maybe a natural. That's about 50% of it. So when people say to me, you know, what are the new colors in fashion? I say black and white and navy and cream. And they've been the same for the last 50 years, the last 100 years. And guess what? They will be in the next 100 years. But people see so much now on their phones. You were kind enough before we came in here to I said, oh, can I see your shop? And you come out and there's the phone and your shop looks absolutely beautiful. And I can't, after this is over, apparently they're bringing me down to be to your shop. But I saw your shop on the phone. I saw the clothes on the phone. I said to my CEO, I said, can I see his online? So online, book. So suddenly, I don't even have to go anywhere. I see it with my eyes. Yeah. And that is a change in the whole way we look at the world. And how's that going to be in 20, 50 years' time? Well, I actually find it very interesting. I live on a little island called Perimbalum, which some of you will know where it is. By the way, it has the new longest bridge in Kerala. And it's to be opened allegedly in the end of December, but it'll be January or February. Anyway, I go down every evening after work down to the ferry. And I was down the other evening and it was dark. And there must have been 20 folk from Perimbalum sitting, waiting for the ferry. And what did I see? 20 lights on. Everybody had their phone. Everybody was looking at their phone. That's where fashion will change, on the phone. They can see it.
You know, what I loved about what you said about the color was how blacks, whites will always remain.
Oh.
You know, so when we started working with the Kasav saris, you know, one of the first things that I did was to change the color from white to black. And what was interesting was that the white Kasav sari is so purist, and it has always been part of the traditional vocabulary in Kerala. But suddenly when it became black, it just became fashion all of a sudden, you know. A sari that people used to wear to a temple, or, you know, like I keep saying that the semiotics of the white Kasav sari is so interesting that if you wear it on a normal day, people will either ask you if you're going to the temple, or if you're going for a wedding, or if it's Onam or Vishu, or it's your Piranal on that day, you know. So, but suddenly when it became black, it became something totally different. It became a cocktail sari. You know, people would wear it with their tube tops and, you know, drape it differently and you know.
And the thing that I find fascinating about color in fashion, someone says the word black. There are an awful lot of different colors of black. If you're as old as I am and you've heard the word black, you think, and then you start to realize there are hundreds of different colors of black. And next time you buy a garment and it's black, you look how black is it? Because there are a whole lot of technical reasons that, you know, if you're on a white sofa and you rub it, the color comes off. And white is an amazing color. I mean, I'm looking at people here in front of me. but all your whites are slightly different. There's no such thing as just white. But that's that. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that film, The Devil Loves Prada, where you see all this nonsense going on about. But that actually happens in the real world. People will have meetings about what blue are they going to wear next year in linen in New York in a shirt. And you would think, look, blue is blue. It's not. There will be hours and hours and hours of people arguing about why this blue is better than that blue and what does this blue mean and whatever. Absolutely fascinating.
You know, while working for IKEA, we would have supplier teams across, the globe. And there was one, the design team in Sweden, which called out to a team in Vietnam and said that they want this particular thing to be in sky blue. And when the samples came in, it was this sort of muddy blue. And they said, but this is not sky blue. So they said, but our sky is this shade of blue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So color is always so subjective. And yet, of course, where the patterns come in, but...
Now, I've just looked at the time here, and we have done, I hope, a sterling job that no one has fallen asleep. Has anybody fallen asleep? I don't think so. I think you're all still awake. And how do we do this? Does anybody would like to ask us a question for a couple?
We have time for one question.
One question. I've timed that beautifully.
Hi, hello, sir.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Suhani. I'm an independent, sensible.
I think your mic is off.
I'm sorry. I'm Suhani. I'm an independent, sensible, responsible fashion storyteller. So while you were talking about, how garment is connected to human, so it basically touched a lot of emotions through me, from head to toe, even through the fingers, cells, everything. I could totally resonate with that, because I believe that garment may be the second best skin to the human being. Right now, I feel that it's your best friend. Like so, and people of wisdom say, choose your garment wise.
I think what you say is so true. When I started my career, we supplied Giorgio Armani in Milan, in Italy. Now, Giorgio Armani's just passed away, but he was one of the great fashion designers of the world. In my view, maybe the greatest fashion designer in the world. If you were to meet Giorgio Armani,
But he's no more.
He actually, yes, he saw a fabric. That wasn't what interested him. The first thing he did was touched it. How does the fabric feel? How does that feel against your skin? How does it make you feel? That is what great design and fabric is so important. And if you ever watch a good fashion designer at work going into a store, I'm not a great fashion designer, it's not my business. But if I go into a store, the first thing I do is I touch it, I feel it. Because that's important. It's like every time I feel something like a very soft cashmere, I just go, I love it. It's got that wonderful, wonderful feel. Or if I see a lovely piece of linen that has been washed and washed and washed, and it's got drape, lovely.
Yeah, actually, I was actually getting into that question. I was just having a warm up. My question is that while we talk about linen, basically it reminds me of your brand Burgoyne first. And
very good, well pronounced.
Thank you. Well, secondly, it just reminded me of the very great Indian designer. He's no more. He's Rohit Bal. He just passed away last year or so. So he was very much connected with, I think he was associating with the brand called Linen Club.
Yes, he was their ambassador.
Yes, and he was the ambassador, and he was like very much fond of linen, and he was also a person who integrated modern sensibilities into the linen. And also, there are people like advocates of anti-fashion like Edel Koot. I think she is a Dutch forecaster, trend forecaster. So we all, I mean, the thing in common is that about the linen, the natural fibers, their sustainability, etc. So my question is, how do you see linen, the evolving, the sustainability of linen in the next 5 years? Also, one thing this is not part of the question, but this is like, I saw recently a video on Instagram. It was made, so it was about Anna Wintour, the Vogue global editor. She was talking about, she just said that, maybe that's her opinion, I don't know. She said that the work culture of fashion has changed. Like earlier, it was about legends, people who specialized in fashion, but right now she sees that it's about Gen Z, it's about knowing a lot of things like, what do you call, there is a, not a somebody who's not specializing, but knowing many skills will have sort of advantage. And then, thank you.
Right, now I'm going to answer this very quickly because I can see a lot of people looking at their watches here thinking, right, got to go now. Linen is classic. It's a classic. And classics don't go out of fashion. They evolve, they change, but they don't go out of fashion. And that's what I would say about the sustainability and the length that linen will last. It's a classic.
And for the second part of your question, you know, there was this talk that I'd listened to by Devdutt Patnaik long back, you know, where he said about how the gods work in India and how the gods work in the rest of the world, you know. So there are many cultures where there's a single god. You listen to a single god and then, you know, that's the truth. But in India, you can have multiple gods. You can have multiple truths, right? Which is why people choose to have their truth. And their subjective truth is their truth. So what's happened in the case of Anna Wintour is that earlier she used to work at a time when there was one fashion norm that trickled down from top to bottom. But because of the way the world works now, because of the way social media is, there's been a lot of democratization, you know. You are now entitled to your truth in fashion because you have multiple truths to choose from, you know. I, as a brand, do not have to believe in what Anna Wintour says. I can choose to believe, I can choose to have my own truth. I can have my set of customers, I can run my business, right? So, which is why they're not able to say that fashion has gone to the Gen Z or fashion has gone here, fashion has gone there. Because we've really come to an open space where anybody can choose what they want and their fashion is right for them.